Today, the Federal Reserve held its benchmark interest rate target between 3.5% and 3.75%. Now, three of the members wanted to raise it. Inflation fell in June, and the unemployment rate is 4.2%. Consumers are still spending money. The economy is still producing. So, depending on which headline you read, things are either holding up remarkably well, or everyone is one insurance renewal away from losing their mind. I am Michelle Vaughn. I'm a consultant, a speaker, and welcome to the Observation Room. I want to do something useful with the economic numbers that came out today. I don't want to repeat a list of statistics and then tell you whether you should feel good or bad about the economy. You already know how your own household feels. I want to help you understand what these numbers actually are measuring, why they may not match what you are experiencing, and how to use them when you are making decisions about work, debt, spending, housing, or your own business. By the end of this episode, when someone says inflation went down, I want you to know what went down meant. And when someone says consumers are resilient, I want you to understand exactly what that number cannot tell you. Or when the Fed changes or does not change an interest rate, I want you to understand why your mortgage quote or your grocery bill and your insurance premium may not move with that. Because the economy is not one big number, and your bank account doesn't care how optimistic the headlines sound. So inflation fell. What does that actually mean? The consumer price index fell 0.4% in June. Now, a large part of that decline came from energy. Energy prices fell from 5.7% during the month, and gasoline fell 9.7%. So overall prices were still 3.5% higher than they were 1 year earlier. Core inflation, which removes food and energy because those prices can move sharply, was 2.6% year over year. Now, food and shelter still increased during the month. So that report contains good news. Gas becoming cheaper matters to you. If you drive to work every day or operate a business with vehicles, you might feel that change immediately. But the phrase inflation fell creates a misunderstanding because some people hear it and assume prices are returning to where they used to be. That's not what this number means. Now, let's say your rent was $1,500. Now, the following year, it was increased to $1,800. But then the following year, it increased to $1,825. The first increase was $300 and the second increase was $25. The rate of increase slowed dramatically. So you're still paying $325 more every month than you were before. And that is what people mean when they say inflation is improving, but prices still feel high to you. Your household does not start over every month. It carries the increase. So the same thing happens with groceries. Maybe the price of a particular item stops rising. That is better than another increase, but it doesn't return the money you spent while the price was climbing. So the first useful question when an inflation report comes out is, did the prices actually fall or did they continue rising more slowly? Then you need to ask what moved the average. So in June, energy did a lot of that work. That matters, but it might not be the category creating the most pressure inside your house. Maybe your gasoline cost went down by $40, but your car insurance increased by $75. Or maybe the food prices were relatively stable for the month, but your property taxes may have rose for the year. Or could be the national shelter number moved slowly while your lease renewed and your rent might have jumped all at once. So the national inflation rate is a wide angle view, but your bank statement is your close-up. Now, a simple way to understand your own inflation is to compare the 5 expenses consuming the most money in your household. Usually those include like housing, your food, your transportation, insurance, healthcare, childcare, and debt. You want to pull the current amount and compare it with what you were paying a year ago. If your auto insurance went up from $220 a month to $290, that category increased almost 32% for you. It doesn't matter that that represents a much smaller movement inside a national index. Your household has to find another $70 every month. Now you do that across all your largest expenses and you'll begin to see where the pressure is actually coming from. Now that information is useful because different cost increases require different responses. A temporary gas increase may change how often you drive, or a temporary insurance increase may require shopping the policy or changing your coverage or adjusting another part of your budget. A housing payment that is consuming too much income is a much larger problem than a subscription you forgot to cancel. So we have developed a strange habit of treating every financial problem like it's hiding inside a $9 charge from an app or even a Starbucks. Sometimes the app needs to go, right? And sometimes you need to stop the Starbucks. But a lot of times the actual problem is the household's three largest expenses have increased by $800 in a short period of time and your income didn't. Those are two different problems. The unemployment rate does not tell you how easy it is to get your next job. So the June employment showed that the economy added 57,000 jobs to the payroll. The unemployment rate remained at 4.2%. Now, the April and May job estimates were revised down by a combined 74,000. So around 1.9 million had been unemployed for at least 27 weeks, which was about 286,000 more than a year earlier. About 4.7 million people were working part-time because they could not find full-time work or because their hours had been reduced. And another 6 million people said that they wanted a job, but they were not counted as unemployed because they had not actively searched during the previous 4 weeks, or they were not immediately available to begin. So the broader measure includes people who are marginally attached to the workforce, and people working part-time for economic reasons was 7.9%. None of that means the labor market has collapsed, but it does explain why the 4.2% might not resemble what you're seeing around you. The unemployment rate uses a specific definition. Someone generally has to be without work, available to work, and actively searching. It does not measure how many applications a person submitted. It doesn't tell us whether or not the job's available pay enough to replace the old income. It does not tell us whether the position includes health insurance or whether the person had to accept contract work or someone's working part-time or while looking for full-time employment. It definitely doesn't tell you how safe it would be to leave your particular job. That's where people can use or see the data incorrectly. They hear unemployment is low and they think the job market must be great. I can leave this position and find something else really quick. Maybe. But before making that decision, I would look at the market for the role that you actually want. How many legitimate openings exist in your field? How many legitimate openings are near your location? How long have those positions been posted? Are the salaries comparable to what you earn now? Do they include benefits? Are companies actually interviewing these people? Are they the same openings appearing month after month? How long are qualified people in your field taking to find work? And what would happen inside of your household if the search took 6 months instead of 6 weeks? The national unemployment rate gives you context, right? Your decision needs to be more specific information. But this helps you understand why the headlines may differ so much from what you're feeling in your own home. The same thing applies to business owners. And a low unemployment rate may mean it's difficult to hire. A softer labor market may produce more applicants, but that doesn't mean the guarantee of applicants have the experience that the business needs. Now, the number tells you something about the overall environment, but it doesn't make a hiring decision for you. And 1 month's payroll number is an estimate. It gets revised as more employer responses arrive, and that is completely normal. The government doesn't call every single business in America on the last day of the month and receive a completed spreadsheet by breakfast. Now, the first report is a useful early estimate. Several months of reports and the revisions to them tell us much more. So I would watch the direction of job growth, the industries gaining or losing positions, and the hours worked and wage growth and participation in long-term employment. One headline might create a political argument, but a trend is what you're looking for. And a trend helps you make a much educated and more well thought out decision. So consumers are still spending, but where's all the money coming from? In May, personal income increased by 0.7%. Disposable income increased by 0.7%, and consumer spending also increased by 0.7%. So after adjusting for inflation, real consumer spending rose 0.3%. 6.3%. The personal savings rate was only 3%. When spending continues, the usual headline says consumers are resilient. And that may be true at a national level, but spending alone does not tell us whether the household itself is secure. People spend because they feel confident. They also spend because the refrigerator broke, or the car needs brakes, or the child needs new shoes, or the electric company continues to expect payment, regardless of how anyone feels about the economy. The number records the purchase itself. It doesn't tell us where the purchase came from. Was it income or savings, or was it done on a credit card? It does not tell us whether the family chose the expense. It doesn't tell us how much money remained after the purchase. Inside your own household, there's a better question than simply asking how much you spent. How much of this month if spending is following me into next month? So if you pay the credit card statement in full, the credit card may simply be the method that you use to pay. A lot of people do this for points. It's a really smart idea if you can learn how to manage those credit cards. But if part of the balance remains, some of this month's life has been moved into next month's income. Now, if that continues, the household is always using future money to support current expenses. Total household debt has reached $18.8 trillion in the first quarter of 2026. Credit card balances were $1.25 trillion, mortgage debt was $13.19 trillion, auto was at $1.69, and student loans were at $1.66 trillion. Now, these totals don't mean that every person with debt is in financial trouble. A mortgage is a debt, a business loan is a debt, financing something can be perfectly reasonable, and it actually can help you make money. The useful distinction is whether or not the debt helped purchase something over time, or whether it's covering a monthly shortage that keeps returning. Let's suppose a household brings in about $6,000 a month and regularly spends $6,500. The $500 difference goes onto the credit card. The family might receive a tax refund or a bonus or a lump sum of some and pay off that balance. But if the income remains at the $6,000 and the household still costs $6,500 to operate, the balance is going to return, and you're going to continue to see yourself in the same situation. The credit card is not the original problem. It's the documenting the problem. That's why telling people to pay off a debt without looking at the monthly gap, it can be useless. The balance might disappear for 30 days while the reason for the balance remains fully employed. Now, this is one reason where a budget will actually help you, not as a punishment and not as like a moral evaluation of every one of your purchases, like you're a bad person. A budget can show you whether the problem is spending that can reasonably change, or a major fixed cost, or high interest debt, or irregular expenses that were never included in the income that no longer supports the household's basic structure. Those problems do not receive the same solution. Okay? Now, doing okay can still mean having no room for anything going wrong. The Federal Reserve's household survey found that 73% of adults describe themselves as doing okay financially or living comfortably. Now, at the same time, 58% said price changes had made their financial situations worse. 16% had not paid off all their bills in the previous during month, and 26% had skipped medical care costs because of the expenses. Only 63% said they could cover a $400 emergency using cash or its equivalent. And 59% had experienced at least one major unexpected expense during the previous year. Those numbers can help explain why economic conversations can feel so disconnected from many Americans' ordinary lives. Doing okay does not mean having financial freedom. Now, sometimes it does, but it always doesn't mean that. It might mean the mortgage is current and the lights are still on and the car is currently still moving. Everything works as long as nothing unusual happens, but unusual things happen consistently. Cars need repairs, appliances stop working, people get sick, insurance has deductibles, work hours change, children somehow need new shoes every time you become comfortable with the amount of money in your account. A household can be current and still be very fragile. So there's a simple way to see that inside your own finances. Now, first, you want to take the amount that it takes to operate your life before anything happens. Housing, utilities, your groceries, your transportation, insurance, your minimum debt payments, childcare, healthcare, and taxes. Now, you want to include the expenses that are real, but do not arrive monthly. If auto insurance is $2,400 every 6 months, that is a $400 monthly cost, even though the company only sends the bill twice a year. Now, if property taxes are $3,600 annually, that represents $300 a month. If car maintenance, school expenses, holidays, professional fees, or medical costs predictably appear during the year, they do belong somewhere in the plan. These expenses are often treated like surprises. Now, Christmas has been on the calendar for quite some time. The annual registration did not break into your house unexpectedly. When reoccurring but irregular costs are left out, the budget appears to have more room than the household actually has. So say someone brings home $6,000 a month and lists $5,200 in regular bills. It appears that there's an $800 cushion. But then we add $400 a month for the semi-annual insurance bill and $200 for the annual property taxes and $150 for the average repairs and medical expenses. The real cushion is $50. That household did not suddenly become irresponsible when the insurance bill arrived. The earlier budget was just incomplete. That is the kind of information that helps people make better decisions. So if you believe you have $800 available, you might accept another $500 payment. Or if you understand that the true margin is really closer to $50, you might look at each decision very differently. Now, what today's Fed decision actually changes? The Fed Reserve has held a target rate between 3.5 and 3.75%. While 3 members did preferred a quarter point increase, but the Fed said the economic activity was continuing to expand. The job gains had kept pace and the workforce and inflation remained elevated relative to its 2% goal. Now, the disagreement matters because it shows that a monetary policy is a judgment being made under uncertainty. These policymakers have access to extraordinary amount of data, and they still do not all agree about the appropriate next step. Those federal funds rate is an overnight rate used between banks. It influences other short-term rates and broader financial conditions. The Fed doesn't have a remote control connected directly to the mortgage rate or your insurance bill or the price of eggs. But when the Fed moves, some borrowing cost money do respond quickly, like your HELOCs or your lines of credit. Others are influenced by what the market expects inflation, your economic growth, and the future Fed policy to look like over a much longer period of time. That's why mortgage rates can rise before the Fed meeting and fall after the Fed meeting holds steady or moved in a direction that confuses everyone who was told the relationship was automatic. The Fed decision is worth following, though. I would pay closest attention to its explanation, right? What is the Fed worried about? That's the most important question to ask. Does it believe inflation remains stubborn enough to justify keep borrowing expensive? Or is job growth becoming weak enough to create a different risk? Does it believe that the economy can continue to absorb current rates? Or does the answer affect businesses deciding whether to borrow, consumers carrying variable rate debt, savers earning interest, and buyers trying to understand housing costs? But I wouldn't postpone every financial decision based on the belief that the Fed is definitely going to rescue it later. If a purchase only becomes affordable after several rate cuts, the purchase is really not affordable under the conditions that you have today. That doesn't mean that rates will never fall. It means that a future event should improve the plan, not only be the reason the plan survives. Now, housing turns percentages into actual dollars. So the average 30-year fixed mortgage rate was 6.58% on July 23rd. Existing home sales declined 2.4% in June. The median existing home price was $440,600, and the market had 4.6 months of inventory. Now, new home sales showed a different market. The median new home price was $398,300. And available supply represented 9.3 months. Now, those numbers are extremely useful because they show why there is no single housing deadline that describes every buyer's experience. Builders with more inventory may offer a closing cost assistance or price reductions or temporary and permanent rate incentives. An individual homeowner with a low existing mortgage may have no reason to sell unless the price is high enough to justify moving for them. Now, a national report can show more inventory while the neighborhood you want still has 4 homes available and 3 of them need a spiritual intervention. The rate also becomes much clearer when we turn that into dollars. So take the median existing home price of $440,600 and assume a buyer makes a 20% down payment, which is not needed nowadays, but it's just easy for math. The loan would be about $352,480. At 3% interest rate, which is, it's not right now, but just math, the principal and interest would be approximately $1,486 a month. Now, at 3% higher at a 6.5% rate, the same loan would be $2,246 a month. That's roughly $760 more every month for the same exact loan. Now, we also haven't added in property taxes or homeowners insurance or association fees or maintenance or utilities. A few percentage can sound small, but $760 a month sounds like a lot of money. And that's what a buyer should really begin with. What price did the lender approve with you with? Or what complete monthly payment leaves enough room for the rest of my life? A loan approval tells you you meet the mortgage lending guidelines, but it doesn't know every goal that you have for your money. Now, it does not know how much you spend on helping your family or how expensive your health needs are, or whether you want to continue traveling the world, or whether you're becoming house poor will make you miserable. The lender is determining whether the loan can be approved. The household still has to decide whether the life attached to the payment works for you. So when comparing new and existing homes, compare the entire situation. Your purchase price, your mortgage rate, your taxes, your insurance, association fees, expected repairs, or did you get incentives? Or do you have to commute to work? Or how much cash is actually going to be required at closing? And how much money will I have after closing? Because you will have to buy blinds and appliances and furniture, new bedding. A buyer can technically afford the down payment maybe, and it still leaves them with no ability to repair the house they just purchased. So closing is not the end of the house requiring money. It's generally just the beginning. So don't make the purchase work by promising yourself that you will refinance later. A refinance may be a wonderful opportunity. It will still depend on your future rates and your income and your credit and your equity and the cost of completing the new loan. The house should make sense under today's known payment. Future improvement should be a benefit. It should not be an emergency life support. Now, how do we read an economic number without letting it tell you how to feel? Now, I understand why people become suspicious when the economic numbers do not match their lives. When they hear inflation fell while insurance increased, or they hear unemployment is low and someone they know cannot find a job for years now, they hear spending is strong while their credit card balance is growing. The number may be accurate and the headline may still be doing too much with it. Every economic measure has a definition. The useful habit is to ask 4 questions. Now, what exactly did they measure? What was excluded? Is this an average, a median, or a total? And is this the first estimate, or has it been revised? The unemployment rate measures people who meet a particular definition of unemployment. It does not measure job search or frustration. The consumer price index measures the average price movement across a large basket. It doesn't reproduce your household's specific expenses. Consumer spending measures the dollar being spent. It does not tell us how financially comfortable the purchase was. GDP measures production. It doesn't matter. It doesn't measure whether your household gained any breathing room or not. So you do not need to throw those numbers away and just You got to stop asking one number to answer all of your questions. So if you're deciding whether or not to leave a job, or the national unemployment rate is the background information, or hiring conditions in your field, or your cash runway matter more. Now, if you're trying to understand why the budget stopped working and the monthly CPI report is the background information, the actual increases in your five largest expenses will show you that number more. Now, if you're trying to decide whether or not to buy a house, the national median price is a background information. The complete payment on the actual property is what enters in your life. Now, that is how the use data becomes useful. Now, four numbers that will tell you more about your personal economy than anything else. You don't need an economics degree to understand your own positioning. Understanding this information will help you control your controllables. So there are four numbers I want you to know. The first number is the true monthly cost of operating your life, including the irregular expenses divided across the year. The second number is how much of your spending is being carried into the next month as debt. The third is your available cash if income stops or a major expense appears. And the fourth is what is the lowest reliable amount of income entering the household, not the best month, not the bonus month, not the month with every business invoice happen to be paid at once. What are that bottom numbers? Those numbers are going to tell you where your pressure points are. If the household is short every month, searching for one more tiny expense to remove may not solve it. At some point, we might have to stop acting as though the $1,200 shortage is hiding in a $6 subscription. The larger answer may involve more income, or housing transfer, or transportation, or debt, or restructuring a whole nother obligation. Now, that doesn't make the answer easy, but it makes the size of the problem honest. Now, if income varies, you got to build the required expenses around the conservative number when it's possible. A strong month can fund your reserves, or reduce your debt, or pay the irregular expenses before they arrive. But the strongest month should not be allowed to sign up the weakest month up for payments it can't carry. And then look at any major decision and ask, what has to happen later for this to work? Does the car require overtime every single month? Does the house require a future refinance? Does the business investment require revenue to arrive immediately? Does the debt plan depend on a bonus that hasn't been earned yet? There is nothing wrong with expecting improvement, but when every decision depends on the improvement arriving on a schedule, the household has no room for life to be life. A good plan should be able to tolerate at least a little disrespect from reality. The purpose of understanding the economy is to not let a headline decide whether you should feel optimistic or afraid. The purpose is to understand the conditions well enough to make a better decision. Inflation falling tells us something about the direction of prices, but your largest household expenses tell you where the pressure is. The unemployment rate tells us something about the national labor market. The hiring conditions in your fields tell you how to prepare for a job change. Consumer spending tells us money is moving. Your debt and savings tell you whether the spending is financially sustainable. The Fed tells us something about borrowing conditions, but the actual payment tells you whether the decision fits your life. Now that's where the numbers become useful. So if housing is a part of the decision that you're working through, whether you're considering buying or refinancing, or simply trying to determine what is realistic for you, I have a team that can help people across the United States. If you want to learn more about my world, you can get connected at michellevaughn.co. I am Michelle Vaughn, and this is The Observation Room. I will see you guys next time.